This is a case study of life in a Passive House Plus, and our family's experience is 5 years on. From the very first conversation, it was always going to be a certified Passive House. But as you already know, that leaves design possibilities very open. That's just one of the things that I love about Passive House. It gives you the tools, but then leaves it to you and your imagination to use any combination of materials, sizes and shapes to deliver a result that will work. Of course, the other vital ingredient that has such an impact on design is the local climate data, which makes it even more interesting, as a home designed in one region that meets the criteria, when moved even just 100 kilometres, can deliver quite a different result. By the way, whilst I'm sharing this information with you, please feel free to add another dimension to the presentation and type in any questions you may have. I'll be able to respond live as we go. I'm hoping that by sharing our journey with you, one or two things that we cover may be helpful in your own journey, as we all share the same vision of growing Passive House in our neck of the woods. For a little bit of background, Lisa, my wife, and I, along with our 3 boys, over the previous 3 years had lived in an energy-efficient home and a non-certified Passive House, both in Wanganui. Based on these experiences and seeing lots of other e-house designs, we had developed a blueprint of the ultimate design that would tick of all of our boxes. The first home we lived in was an e-house prototype, which we'd built to prove to ourselves that Passive House was relevant and actually worked in New Zealand. Bearing in mind when we started, back in 2010, there were very limited climate data available, and there were no examples of even an airtight home, let alone a Passive House. This home did not meet the standard, but sat in the PHI low energy rating. We did achieve the air tightness requirements of 0.6 air changes an hour at 50 pascals, but the thermally broken, locally manufactured window joinery, which were the best available at the time, pushed it outside the surface temperature requirements, and also heat load and demand. The second home that we lived in was for Lisa's parents, who were moving to New Zealand from the UK. They wanted a warm home above all else, and they already knew from previous visits that even though it was warmer in New Zealand than the UK, the homes were not. So we calibrated with Duncan Sinclair of Black Pine Architects, who also lives in Wanganui, and created a lovely home for them. We actually got to live in it first, as they were still overseas when it was finished, and we were just starting our own build, so technically homeless. Our mission, as you can imagine, was keeping it like new for 6 months, with the children exceeding all expectations. We had already come up with a name for our home, Partenay, which is actually the name of a French village we stayed in that we really enjoyed, and also Partenay is a nod to the Passive House built in France. We thought it was very cool because of its simple geometry, and although we're not sure about the bamboo and how that would survive on a site that has extra high wind load rating. The design brief that the family developed was to suit the now, with 3 rapidly growing boys, and the future, most likely with just the 2 of us for the majority of the year. We were looking for a 2-level home. Coming from the UK, it always feels more natural to go upstairs to bed. Of course, there are other reasons based on building science too. We were keen to keep the design compact, and we were also not wanting a McMansion. The less materials used, the better for the planet. Having said that, 4 bedrooms was really important and big enough for a desk and a full-size wardrobe in each of the boys' bedrooms. A separate laundry was on the wish list, along with a media room, or as Lisa preferred to call it, a separate lounge. Just like everyone else, we too had a budget. It wasn't that big, and so we had to be very careful in the planning stages. So, the plan from the outset was an efficient design from a passive house perspective, but also a focus on good space planning. How can you fit 4 bedrooms, 3 toilets, 2 bathrooms, entrance room, laundry, media room, kids space, lots of storage, plus of course kitchen, dining and lounge in a TFA of 134.5 metres squared? Well, here is one version of how. I'm sure there are many others too. So the house has a footprint that's 12.8 metres long, 6.6 metres wide, plus an upstairs 1.2 metre balcony on the northern aspect. 3 of the bedrooms open out onto the balcony, with part of its function to provide the shading. With the north orientation, the direct sunlight never comes into the house in the summer months. There are no opening windows, but every room except bedroom 4 has that tilt-turn door, which doubles as a window for external ventilation. The same applies downstairs, with 3 French doors opening out onto the outdoor covered space. Interesting, no south-facing windows. I know that's pretty unusual. We have a 100km/h rural road on this side of the home, so we're happy to reduce the road noise, but as you know, the main reason for the decision, minimising energy loss and cost reduction. It is a fact that every window costs more than a wall, and even the best south-facing window leaks far more energy than a wall. Lisa said, I'm not sure about that. So I used the get out of jail free card. Hey, if it doesn't work, we can always put some in. It was actually the same card that I came into play when suggesting to Lisa, just before we were married, that emigrating to New Zealand was a great idea. Hey, I said, if it doesn't work out, we can always come home. By the way, that worked out really well. And so I was quietly confident that such a minor thing like this would too. Having no windows on the south side also created a few extra opportunities to really put the design and building science to the test. From a company and passive house perspective, it was the perfect chance to test some theories. When designing new homes for our clients, we are often asked if it's okay to fit things like sun tunnels or skylights in our designs to get as much natural light into the home as possible. And the answer, of course, is yes. But when you're using the PHPP, you are aware that there are trade-offs for that lovely natural light that a sun tunnel delivers. What trade-offs are these? Well, they're the thermal losses, the extra air tightness challenge, extra work in general, and of course the cost and weather tightness potential for ongoing maintenance. Our family bathroom is situated on the south side of the building, and so would be a natural light candidate for a sun tunnel or skylight window. But instead, we fitted a 600mm square warm LED panel. This is automatically activated when a person enters the bathroom, and along with the mirror light, works extremely well. We also included one of those glass panels above the door for borrowed light from the upstairs open plan area. Okay, a second test scenario that created having no windows in the main bathroom was when we were designing the ventilation system. So we were a bit cautious and we put 2 vents instead of 1 to ensure it met the New Zealand Building Code requirements with a significant margin. But I can say after 5 years of use, we have no mould, no peeling paint, and believe me, it's had a really good workout with a 30-minute showers, etc. You know what it's like living with 3 teenagers in the house. So why does it work so well compared to a normal bathroom, with windows that can open and noisy extractor fans? There are 3 main reasons. The first is the air temperature is always above 18 degrees C and normally above 20. The second is the surface temperatures are also above 18 degrees and normally above 20. The third is we have a constant exchange of 11 litres per second without boost which is taking away any air laden with moisture and replacing it with warm, dry air. It's actually that simple. This drone footage gives you an idea of the location of the house, with Lisa's parents living next door, with chickens and cows in between. For the construction of the walls, we chose a polystyrene block system, or ICF as it's known. The blocks with the hollow core are locked in together and then concrete is poured into the core for stability. Steel is used to give the structural strength required, which is supported into the centre of the concrete, without the need to tie prior to pouring. The choice of ICF system was mainly because of the extra high wind loading, which would require additional structure if SIPs or a timber frame was used. It also means that the home is really quiet, with no movement, even in the highest gale force winds that we've experienced. So the block has a 65mm wall thickness, and so the two layers provide sufficient insulation to achieve the passive house requirements. The concrete pad floats on 150mm of polystyrene, with footings that use a VH grade with 65mm thickness. This yields a thermal bridge-free construction with a psi value of just 0.006 watts per meters Kelvin. The window joinery is wood alu, manufactured in New Zealand by Eco Windows. Double glazing is sufficient in the warm temperate climate of Wanganui. And the ventilation system is installed in the laundry and has really short duct runs that are mainly in the mid-floor, feeding both the ceiling-mounted downstairs vents and the wall-mounted grills in the bedrooms. Apart from changing the filters each year and cleaning the extract valves occasionally, the system has required no attention and just runs basically in the background. There's a boost switch that we fitted in the bathrooms, but even if this is not used, we've discovered that the house is dry all the time, with relative humidity tracking around 50, falling a little bit lower in the winter and a bit higher in the summer. The hot water is provided with an externally located hot water heat pump, which has 285 litre capacity. This is primarily programmed to operate during the day, so if the sun is shining, the heat energy generated outside is used directly on site. We also run the washing machine and dishwasher during the day when it's convenient. The 3 kilowatt solar PV system consists of 12 panels and mounted on the roof in a single line, with an inverter mounted in the electrical cupboard. It is a really simple system and again has required no maintenance. It would be nice to add a battery storage facility in the future, but when you see in a moment the power bills, it's really a nice to have and far from essential. When we designed the home, Passive House Plus option had not actually been created, but when we ran the numbers in the new version of the PHPP, it met the requirements with a 32 kilowatt an hour primary energy renewable per square metre and generating 45 kilowatt hours of PV energy per square metre of its footprint each year. So we decided to certify it as a Passive House Plus and received the certificate in March 2016. A decision was made early on to have a separate garage next to the house that can be connected with a covered walkway. The 6x9 garage and workshop is very conventional. We found that the cars and bikes don't mind if it's a bit chilly in the evenings, and of course saves money in the envelope. With a compact design, we were also aware how important it is to mitigate the internal transfer of noise. So we've used fiberglass bats in the mid-floor and most party walls, and have the same with the solid core doors. The mid-floor was also very well glued and screwed with the flooring to prevent those annoying squeaks and creaks. Like most people, we regard fresh water as a really precious resource, and although we have access to town supply, we decided to put in our own 22,500 litre buried concrete tank to harvest the water from the roof. The system has a few simple features that we'd already proved in the first project, as well as roof feeding the rainwater into the tank. There's a feed from the town supply that's created by a float valve. So if the tank falls below a quarter, the town supply fills the tank. We can also bypass the tank and switch to the town supply with a three-way ball valve. This has been really useful when servicing the submersible pump in the tank and when we have the occasional power cut. So the tank supplies enough water currently for about 10 months of the year, but I expect when the boys move out, it'll last that summer dry period as well. The grey and black water is treated on site with a 3-tank worm system that's coupled to a drainage field, and again with minimal maintenance required and only a small electric pump, it's pretty efficient. By the way, next door has a similar system that is actually gravity fed with no pump required at all, and this is due to the fall of the site. How about living experience? We all know that life in a passive house is good. Of course, that's why we're here today. But how good is it? The house we monitored for a year, and here are the graphs. It operates between 20 to 25 degrees, as expected, almost all of the time, and the relative humidity is between 40 to 60 year-round. But what about in the middle of winter, when the sun hides for a few days? In Wanganui, the temperature drops to 2 or 3 degrees, and living in the house, you can actually feel that energy slowly leak out. With no active heating, the temperature can drop overnight from 22 degrees to 18 degrees. We could easily heat overnight to keep the temperature above 20 degrees, but we don't. When we come home early in the evening, on goes the 400-watt panel heater in the main living area. But when the oven goes on, along with computers and the TV, we can actually see that temperature rise to about 22 degrees, as if by magic. It's not magic, it's building science. And the reason we don't heat through the night, even in the middle of winter, is more often than not, the solar gain on the following day, along with those internal heat gains, is enough to replace the heat energy that was lost. But what about the cost to build versus cost of ownership? This is a normal question that most people ask. So the house was $427,000 to build, and here is a total cost of energy to run the home for the last 5 years. The first column shows the total power bill for the year. That's $1,037, including the 15% GST, with an average of $86 per month. It's interesting to note that if you take off the GST, line charges and levies, the actual cost of the electricity consumed comes down to $38 a month. If you compare this to a typical new code house, which is using electricity for hot water and heating, the savings are significant. I've calculated these based on an air-to-air heat pump and a conventional hot water cylinder, which most new code houses are using in New Zealand. So this represents an average savings of about $358 a month. I've calculated that the additional cost to build the Passive House Standard was about $48,000 or 11% more. That is quite a difficult calculation, as this home looks nothing like a standard New Zealand home. But in essence, I've replaced or removed everything that would not be normally provided in the standard code-built home. You can see that by year 11, we've actually paid for all the extra cost, and then after 25 years, the forecasted savings continue to grow. It's important to note that this is only looking at the running costs of the home. So let's highlight a few of the other benefits that we've experienced so far. The first, that Lisa was really quick to spot, is when you come home after work, there's actually nothing that you need to do. You can just put the kettle on and have a cup of tea. What she meant by this was our previous home was a lovely 100-year-old villa. But when you came home, especially in the winter, there was a flurry of activity required. The priority number one was to light the fire. You're still wearing your outside coat at this stage, so this needs to happen as soon as possible. On a typical winter day, the temperature come 4 p.m. was dropping and the house was already cold. So cranking up the fire was a matter of survival. Of course, this was assuming that the paper, the kindling, the dry wood was prepared and all ready to go. The next was to close the skylight windows that needed to be opened during the day to try and dry out the moisture in the bedrooms from the previous night. After doing that, the next was closing all the curtains and making sure there are no gaps. Then put on the heater in the bathroom, ready for the kids' bath time, so it wasn't a fridge in there. Then, of course, back to the fire to make sure it had not gone out, checking that the next logs were ready to go on. The heat was not really still coming through at this stage. So maybe time for a cup of tea, but still in your coat, as it takes typically 45 minutes for the fire to really have a positive impact on the temperature. So what price do you put on the convenience of not needing to do any of that on most days of the winter? Number two is the internal maintenance, or should I say the lack of it. 5 years on and the bathrooms look the same. No mould, no cabinetry that's got those slightly warped edges with moisture loading. More than that, because of the stable humidity coupled with the attention to detail in the construction stage, there's actually no cracks in the plasterboard in the home. Number three is health. Our oldest, Harry, has asthma, and sad to say this is a direct result of living in that villa. Although we had an oil heater in the bedrooms, it was really impossible to maintain a reasonable nighttime temperature. His bedroom was on the southeast side with 2 external walls, and initially the head of the bed was close to the window, which is pretty normal. We found out after we got into Passive House that this is the worst possible scenario, as it creates an environment for the presence of cold, damp air, which is one of the catalysts for asthma. Once we discovered this, we moved the bed so that its head was closest to the warmest internal walls, which certainly helped. Harry is over it now, but for many children, the asthma and bronchial issues just continue to stay with them for life as they continue to live in cold, damp housing. That's why eHouse recently became gold sponsors for the New Zealand Asthma and Respiratory Foundation. Okay, before we get too carried away, let's look at some of the typical challenges that can be associated with designing and building a passive house. And let's see how we were able to address them with our own project. The first is, how do you avoid overheating in summer months? From our own experience and others, it's mission critical to get the design right for the summer as well as the winter, especially in warmer climate regions. This house is actually 14 degrees off north to the east, and the balcony gives a 1.2 metre overhang, which does ensure that none of that direct sunlight comes into the building in the summer months. For this project, the PHPP indicated with the stress test that we were sitting on less than 1% overheating. We did not fit active cooling, and so when required, we used the principle of night purging. Because a passive house has such an efficient thermal envelope, any extra heat energy that's gained during the day needs to be removed at night, or the gain in temperature will compound day on day. Here in New Zealand, we're fortunate that it's pretty normal for a summer nighttime air temperature to be at least a few degrees less than the internal temperature. So that temperature differential enables the night purging to be really effective. As the graph shows, there are very few days when 25 degrees is exceeded, and this is only during the day, and then the nighttime temperature drops back typically to around 23. We find this perfectly acceptable from a comfort perspective, especially as the air is dry and there's plenty of fresh air too. The second challenge relates to the placement of the ventilation vents. Although movement of air is relatively slight, when fresh air comes in to the living and bedrooms, it still can feel a bit cold just because it's moving air. That's why it's really important to endeavour to avoid locating the vents directly in the line of fire of where people will be sitting or sleeping. I guess this is pretty obvious, but certainly worth mentioning. Many of the vents are designed to introduce the fresh air horizontally, which can mitigate this potential issue. In our home, there's one vent that you can just detect when sitting. We had originally used this type of a vent, but one person in the family, who I'm not going to mention, thought it was a bit ugly, that type of vent, so we changed them for another option, which pushes the air straight down. It's not really a problem, and so that vent remains. The third is about the occupancy rates. So do they actually affect the performance of the building? This again is a question that we get asked quite often, and when we present the energy modelling reports to our clients, showing that occupancy rate. So we do notice that change in internal heat gains with less people in the house. We're now down to 3 of us, but we've brought a dog to help substitute the other 2 boys not living with us permanently anymore. To be honest, not much of a contribution. Here's why. The fact is that occupancy rates contribution to internal heat gains is totally dependent on what the occupant is actually doing while living in the home. That has a far greater impact than the number. One of the boys loved having a 30-minute shower and running a really grunty gaming computer, whereas the others didn't. Even with these variations, the overall impact is minimal. In winter, what actually seems to make the biggest difference is whether we stay at home for dinner and cook with the oven, or if we eat out. As you can tell, keeping this presentation to 30 minutes has not been easy, but I trust that it's been helpful to you and your journey with Passive House. I'm going to conclude now with a very brief summary in the format of some final takeaways for you. Firstly, is it worth it? Duh, totally, yes. If you don't live in a passive house yet, do all in your power to remedy that. Getting the design right is mission critical, and you can only do that by using the PHPP. You can add to Passive House standard things like water conservation, choosing materials that have green credentials. Like Hiberna's straw house. If you haven't seen it already, check it out on the Passive House database. Very cool. If you want to, you can design and build a passive house that is 400 meters squared just for 2 people to live in. But we all know that is not such a cool idea, and there's a real renaissance for creating compact, high-performance homes. There's a great financial argument there, but almost all of our clients choose us because they want comfort, health, and to be kind to the planet. Beware of overheating. That percentage is for the whole building, so take extra care over bedrooms, as this is the last place that you want it to be too hot at night. If you want to find out a bit more about my home, then you can check out Cara Rossmeyer's and Robin Brimblecombe's book, Positive Energy Homes. If you haven't got a copy already, I'd highly recommend it. It is a great guide for Passive House in New Zealand and Australia. I really hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you for your participation in this presentation. Thanks.